everyone, and welcome back. In our last video, we discussed the data in our 2022 court monitoring report. In this video, we're going to discuss why we think South Carolina's DUI conviction rate is so low and what we think can be done to improve it.
So that's Chandler Boatwright, MADD South Carolina Program Manager. I'm Stephen Burt, Regional Executive Director for MADD in the Carolinas. Yes, if you want to go back and check out that first video, we suggest that to hear a little bit about the data that actually went into what we're talking about here. But you could just skip ahead, and the gist of it is that we have really low conviction rates in South Carolina. We just go into some of the more specific numbers in that one. But now we're going to talk a little bit more about why and what we can do differently. And I want to point out that what we're talking about in this section are not things that we wrote about because we were sitting in court hearing cases. This really comes from what we call our stakeholder roundtable discussions, where we get together prosecutors, law enforcement officers, sometimes members of the judiciary, sometimes some of our volunteers and key partners, and really talk collectively about why so many cases get pled down or tossed out. How we can do things differently. So what we're going to talk about here really comes from as much from those discussions as it does from the numbers we talked about in the last video.
Yes, so based on everything we have learned, we offer the following areas most in need of attention by the state. The first focus area I'm going to talk about is increasing focus on implied consent hearings. What are implied consent hearings? So these consent laws refer to the fact that when you get a driver's license, you are agreeing to provide a breath sample to law enforcement if you are ever suspected of impaired driving. People do have the option of refusing in the moment, but that does come with a penalty, an automatic 6-month license suspension. In South Carolina, we allow those who have their license suspended for refusing or for blowing over a 0.15 BAC to keep driving if they contest the suspension and get a temporary alcohol restricted license. So ranging from a few weeks to a few months, they will have a hearing before an administrative hearing officer to determine that if the officer had proper justification for the traffic stop, if they followed all proper procedures, and if the license suspension was correctly issued or not. So this hearing is a separate process from the criminal case. In the criminal case, they're determining whether the person broke the law, but this is a whole different process. And our data tells us that 41% of the people who were asked to give a breath sample when they were arrested for DUI refuse. So we want people to use these administrative hearings to their benefit. It could help with overall conviction rates and maybe prevent some more future DUIs. If you want to learn more about implied consent hearings, you can go to the report. It's at madd.org/SC. We have a lot more information and explain exactly what these hearings are in the report.
Okay. And our next focus area is a little bit more about the refusal law. In addition to asking law enforcement and prosecutors to really show up to those hearings and try to make sure people suffer those penalties. In general, the entire refusal law for our state is messed up. And again, that goes back to why Chandler has mentioned we have a 41% conviction rate. Just another thing we'll mention about how this whole area needs attention is that in South Carolina, the severity of the penalty you get for DUI is based on your BAC. So when people refuse, we don't have a BAC to base that on, so we don't know whether to give them lowest, middle, highest. So not surprisingly, in South Carolina, what do we do when somebody refuses, but they're still found guilty, but we don't know what their BAC was? We assume they had the lowest of all BACs. So again, it really just feels like we go out of our ways to incentivize people to refuse, and we can do a lot better with that. Again, other states certainly do a lot better with that sort of thing. The next focus area has to do with the dash cam statute. And this is probably the issue we've been talking about the longest in terms of what really needs to change for South Carolina, because it's probably the #1 reason why so many cases get pled down. So there's nothing wrong with using dash cam video for a DUI prosecution. The problem is in South Carolina, we put so much reliance on it. It really is, to some degree, the entire case. If anything goes wrong with the video, if anything happens off camera, it's almost impossible in South Carolina that you're going to get a conviction. Things have gotten a little bit better over time with some court rulings that have made this better, but still, if we just brought some sanity back to that and understood that officers are trying to do a difficult job, often in the middle of the night on the side of the road, and that they're not a TV production crew, we could bring some sanity back to this and start to get some more convictions.
And the next two focus areas that I'm going to talk about kind of go hand in hand. First off, we would recommend that we get the conviction the first time someone is charged with a DUI in South Carolina. In our roundtable meetings that we discussed earlier, many law enforcement officers spoke ways about an issue MADD knows all too well. And if we don't treat these first DUI seriously and get it right after that first arrest, what comes later may haunt all of us. Those who go through the system the first time and end up with a lesser offense, they are even more savvy to the process and are even harder to convict if they are arrested later for another DUI. Now, they have already seen that they can get a deal and they will expect it again. South Carolina can improve by more aggressively seeking convictions on first-time offenders and also requiring ignition interlock devices for all offenders. So to do this, we would need more aggressive prosecution efforts. Part of ensuring this is that there are sufficient resources dedicated to DUI prosecution. We need to reduce the frequency that officers in South Carolina are prosecuting their own DUI arrest without the assistance of a legally trained prosecutor. When we were discussing this with our key experts and key traffic safety partners, the consensus is largely that having these officers prosecute their own DUI cases should be reduced or eliminated, because their time is better spent doing what they were actually hired to do, enforcing the law. And they're not trained lawyers, and they're going up against these DUI defense attorneys who went to law school. Often they will be mismatched going against them. And our data shows that in courts that have low prosecution support, they only had a 31% average conviction rate. In courts in areas that had high prosecution support areas, that jumped up to a 58% conviction rate. So really the data shows us that we need to reduce the amount of times that these officers are having to prosecute their own cases.
Yeah, absolutely. The next area we want to focus on are judges. So if you go to court sometimes on a DUI day where they're going through DUI cases, you might get the impression that the judge isn't really a major player in this, because frankly, they're largely just agreeing to the plea deals that have already been worked out. Maybe it's a guilty plea, maybe it's a plea down to lesser driving, or reckless driving. But we know that judges have a really important role when they make rulings, like throwing out a dash cam video over something small, or they just don't seem to want to convict people or take it very seriously in their courtroom. That's going to affect the way prosecutors handle their cases, the way officers handle their cases in the courtroom. So we can't look at this terrible DUI situation we have in South Carolina. Again, we are arguably one of the nation's absolute worst for DUI. And not say that judges have some role in this. If any courtroom, if DUI is not taken as seriously as it should be, then that judge is a part of the issue and can be part of the solution as well. And then improving training for our officers. The DUI statute we have in the state is incredibly complex. It puts a lot of pressure on even our best officers to make sure they do everything right every single time. But it is the law that we currently have, and even though it's harder than it should be, we need to make sure that we train our officers well, keep them motivated to do a good job. When they do a good job, we can get convictions in this state, but it is very easy to make a small mistake. So continue training, continued recognition, so that our officers make the best cases possible for our prosecutors, then hopefully to go on it and get convictions out of them, is important.
Yes, and our last focus area is to enhance use of technology for DUI enforcement and prosecution. Some aspects of our state's fight against DUI could be boosted by maximizing the available technology that we have. First of all, we would need to follow the wisdom of 35 other states and pass a law requiring all convicted DUI offenders to install an ignition interlock device for some period of time. These devices are the in-car breathalyzers, and they have prevented nearly 4 million drunk driving trips in this country. Yet, South Carolina still only requires them for repeat offenders and high BAC, those with greater than 0.15 BAC, first-time offenders. So we really need to work on that. And then also, courts should adopt the technology that was used during COVID, such as having nurses or toxicologists appear in hearings over Zoom to verify the chain of custody or the blood draws, instead of having them have to come in person, because they're very busy people and we don't want to inconvenience them or have them not show up, in that case, get thrown out for that reason. Finally, similar to the concept above, we can use the technology in obtaining search warrants more quickly and more efficiently from summary court judges for the felony DUI crashes to get a blood draw. Why would we not take advantage of this technology when it would better the prosecution and adjudication of DUIs in South Carolina?
So those are the things we focused on in this report. Again, some of them are technical, some of them are very common sense and just a change of mindset and attitude. But I just want to bring everyone back to the fact that, this report we put out, we used the most strong language we ever had. And again, we called this report Deadly Results. We think there's no longer a time where we can look at our state's terrible fatality rankings, again, among the worst in the nation, and the fact that we have this incredibly low conviction rate and not realize that these two things are connected. We have to do better with these first offense DUIs so that they don't turn into the people who cause the kind of crashes that create tragedies. And so we think we put forward some things are legislative, some things are things that prosecutors could do, judges could do, law enforcement agencies could do. Everyone just kind of stepped up and did a little better. We think we could really start to see a change in these numbers and most importantly, save lives. So again, if you want to go check out that report, it's at mad.org/SC under the report section. A lot of work has gone into that. Court monitoring continues. In some next year after, we'll put out another report and hopefully we'll see that these numbers have changed. So again, we thank the court monitoring staff who have worked on this, and Chandler was a part of the team that really collected the data to put this together. Thank you for watching this video and perhaps the one before about the particular data. And there's lots of ways to get involved. We should end by saying volunteers can absolutely be court monitors. We can be in more places in these key counties collecting more case data if we have more volunteers. So if you're interested in that, it's a really interesting, impactful kind of daytime volunteer role if that's something that fits your schedule. So thanks again for your support of MAD South Carolina and the efforts we're doing for a future of no more victims.